pieces and the residue of an 8-8 Ravens season and getting ready for playoff football that we're not a part of this weekend. We will be watching, and of course, I will set sail along with Luke Jones to Houston for Super Bowl 51. We'll have full coverage there the entire Super Bowl week. But as we sort of skate to the finish here, we've seen Black Monday, we've seen owners have press conferences. Steve Bisciotti will meet the media in Owings Mills next week, and our professor of sports business here from Georgetown University, and can be followed out on LinkedIn and Twitter at Marty Conway. He is our defending champion. We want to get 2017 off to the right start. We got to bring in the big league and the heavy hitters. Marty Conway back on with us discussing all things business as 2017. And interesting to see the NFL sort of in this way where these Black Monday press conferences, that's not good business, right? I mean, none of these franchises are in good shape when they're firing their head coach. And what happened in Denver may be different, but the rest of these places, these are depressed places right now, right?
Yeah, and in fact, the NFL requires at least one postseason press conference. So every head coach, owner, whoever is going to pull that oar has to do it. So when you see these, I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, it gives you some peek. At least it pulls back the curtain slightly to a certain extent. Maybe it allows the general public to see what the media might see more often, and that is you get a sense of how the organization functions or doesn't function in the case of dysfunction, and it kind of lays it on the line, and you draw a contrast. And talking about contrast, you mentioned that I think the Ravens do their annual State of the Ravens next week, and it will be four people. It will be the owner, it will be the club president, it will be the general manager, it will be the head coach, right? Many places around the league, and I point to Buffalo, for example, where the way that the Rex Ryan firing went down, and then the postseason was the general manager was on a three-way call with the owner and the head coach on their weekly sort of catch-up. And towards the end of that call, the head coach, Rex Ryan, asked if he could speak to the owner one-on-one, so the general manager dropped off the line. Was a minute or two later, and the owner called the general manager and said, well, Rex is no longer going to be our head coach. So the general manager had to go before the media after that, and they blankly asked them, well, what were the reasons for Rex's firing? And he said, I really can't tell you because I wasn't a part of the conversation. So, again, it's just...
So who's running the joint? Where is that flow chart at the top, right?
Well, just the owners don't have any obligations whatsoever. As the owner, Jed York, said of the San Francisco 49ers this week, you can't fire the owner. That was his response to media questions about why they needed a new coach. Now, they're on their third or fourth new coach, and in the last 5 years, they're going to have another 2 or 3 general managers in that time frame. So there's clearly an amount of dysfunction there. But, at the very least, owners don't have to do anything. But good owners, I think, allow at least to come out and have some level of transparency, right, which is to answer the questions that can be addressed and only answered by the owner. You certainly have powerful general managers. Ozzie Newsome is a powerful general manager. But at the end of the day, media wants and needs, and I think to a certain extent deserves, to hear a response from the most senior person, equity person in the group.
But see, I don't think they're talking to the media. I feel like they're talking to the fans, and when the media is in the room, it gets pointed at as that's media. No, those are cameras into laptops for your season ticket holders, right? I mean, literally. Your stakeholders,
I think there's a level of allowing the light to go through the shades, right? And that's something to the public because, again, it's just in these moments, it's just in these few occurrences. Steve Bisciotti is only going to be seen in those circumstances, but for very few times. And what you saw when you contrast with what happened with the Ray Rice example a few years ago, this is where ownership tends to, they don't build up this kind of capability, right, unless they're out there as often as possible. And so people may not like Jerry Jones, but you know what? You see him all the time and you understand. And also Jerry Jones has gotten good. He's built up his sort of muscle memory around how to deal with the media, which, as you say accurately, transcends over to fans and followers and season ticket holders and all of that. So it just seems to help. Now, look, some of owners and their families aren't very good with the media, and so it's better that they defer it to somebody else. But at the end of the day, I think that good business practice amongst professional sports is an owner who is generally available and generally good with the media. And look, if you're not good with the media and you own the team, spend a little money and become good at it.
Stan Kroenke, you're talking about maybe that train wreck about 9 months ago when he moved the franchise?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it just helps you through the tough times if people get a sense that there's something there, right, as opposed to, I think, generally thinking fans, when times get difficult, they think of the worst and they think of people in their worst way. And so you want to, you want to do what you can to preserve that opportunity. Now,
well, like when I talk to Blue Jays fans, they talk about like this wizard that owns their team. Rogers community. Nobody even knows who runs the team. Most of these all these NFL places, other than Green Bay, and even Green Bay has a person. The NFL's is good, and the NBA's gotten better at that too. At the owner being there and looking like he cares as to whether the team wins or loses, because they're all making a lot of money at this point. That's the difference from back when you used to run franchises. Guys really did lose money back then for a while. Nobody's losing any money in modern sports anymore.
No, and as you mentioned about corporate ownership, that's one of the reasons why most commissioners, most leagues were able to sort of outlaw or out-provision corporate ownership. If you remember, at one point, Fox owned the Los Angeles Dodgers, and quite clearly, when you have corporate ownership and when you don't have a single owner or maybe a family, something small like that, it just, the responsibility tends to get diffused over to some larger context, which isn't good for the long run.
Well, and then there's the whole part of what message they're trying to convey at this point. And Marty, I guess this is a jumping off point for our corridor, right? Like, you live in the middle between Baltimore and Washington. You spend more time in Washington, but you cut your teeth up here in Baltimore building the Orioles and building Camden Yards and all the stuff you've been through. This was an awakening year for me, bro. Right? I mean, like, let's go back to you and I bitching about the old man not putting tickets on sale last year and how that would trickle down. Well, it trickled down into an empty stadium in September with a team that was very much in the pennant race, that had as good a chance of winning as anybody else had of winning, despite their pitching issues. And then you have the baseball team, struggling getting people in September as the football team ramped up for another year with the same quarterback, another year with the same head coach. And Marty, this is the first year in the 21 years, and I was there when Paris Glendenning and Art Modell and David Modell pulled into the parking lot, and the whole thing was just a dream with the Browns. This is the year it went backwards. This was the first crack in that foundation, and the Redskins went through this 2 decades ago when they started losing, where they built a very big stadium and those yellow seats upstairs that nobody wanted to sit in. This was the first year, all over my Facebook, all over my social media, in the stadium, in my section, in everybody's section, empty seats, tickets that were sold, and people just said, I'm not even going to bother going to the game, and tons of out-of-town fans this year in a way that we've, quite frankly, never seen it. And I don't see as many fights as I used to see, because I don't think people are all that upset that Eagles fans are in the building anymore, Raiders fans or Steelers fans. I don't think they care anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. I mean, the other data point where you can determine sort of what's going on in the market is the secondary market, and I would occasionally go out and look at the value of Ravens tickets or Redskins tickets or whoever it is, just to check and see what's going on. And when you see the secondary market price below what the price of the gate is, or what a season ticket was, or some other level of data like that, gives you a pretty good idea of where your market is. And I would tell you that I think I could probably only count on one hand the number of sport owners who would even know to go to the secondary market and look at what the ticket pricing is going on. I think Ted Leonsis in Washington is one of the more nuanced owners, one of the more forward-thinking.
Yeah, I think he knows when a Tuesday night when the Winnipeg Jets are in and tickets are $12 on StubHub, it's a little different than a Saturday when Pittsburgh's in town and it's $100 to get in, right?
Yeah, and when that was happening to the Wizards and has been happening to the Wizards as a part of it. So that's an important part. And yes, I'm about ready to do a kind of a longer piece, either for school or for publication, around the correlation, what I think is similar between professional sport organizations and the entertainment industry, specifically the movies. And what's happened with the movie industry is each year they're reporting a slight increase in the revenue from tickets sold, but it's coming from two places. Number one, it's coming from cutting down the inventory at the theater. If you go to a theater now, it used to have a few hundred seats. Now it has 100 seats, but they're wider, bigger, longer, and have cup holders and everything else. So there's that. And then also increasing the price of the tickets, either based on 3D or some of the other functions that they have, or just a slight price increase. But what's holding them back is the only way that the movie industry now thrives year over year is when the sequels are better than the original, right? And if you think about that analogy to sports, that's exactly the way that I think that owners have to start looking at their teams, and that is my sequel better than my previous opening, right? And in the case of the Ravens, yes, the record was better, 8-8 versus what they were 5-11 the year before, but the perception of the public doesn't say that the sequel is or is going to be better, right? And so a little
hope,
bit more
right?
of that,
You're selling hope, literally, right?
yeah, well, a little bit more of that nuance, like how are you selling it? Are you selling it like a sequel, right? What's your marketing strategy? How does it work? To say that you're coming out again with another version, it's like saying about the iPhone, here's iPhone 6 and here's iPhone 6S. What's the difference? You figure it out. Well, most people won't figure that out. Now, when the iPhone moves between 6, 7, or 8, you can tangibly see the difference, and that's what drives adoption. And I think sport owners have gotten to the point where they're trying to tug on all these other levers to give you more benefits and put more features in your hands, and the public is looking back and saying, I'm just not really that interested in that product unless you're going to make it demonstrably better. Now, what does that mean for the Ravens? I have no idea. That's out of my depth to know on the field what it means to be demonstrably better. Maybe you have to play differently. You have to have different people in different roles. But I think that's what people now have become sensitized to as entertainment buyers. And unless you can deliver something at that level, you're likely to see what they've seen, which is a gentle and careful erosion throughout the season. And then once that tide begins to turn, it's really difficult to get it back unless you get on an 11-4, 11-5 season.
Yeah, the only thing you can do to re-inspire people is win. Showing up is not good enough anymore. Drafting another Ray Lewis wouldn't be good enough right away. It's winning, and in so many of these places, there are these hopeless press conferences, as you've brought out in San Francisco, in Jacksonville, in Cleveland, Chicago. These godforsaken places in the league where we have Ravens fans yelling about firing the head coach and the coordinator and the quarterback's no good. And they were, last I checked on Christmas Day, they were 4 feet away from potentially going to the playoffs and playing playoff games. I mean, you can't get any closer to the playoffs, but then again, you can't get any further away than Cleveland and Jacksonville and some of these outposts where they don't have any good football players, and it's not close. And there's a bunch of baseball teams in the National League that are, I can sit here right now, and they're, the tanking part that we talked about when the owners' meetings rolled through a couple weeks ago. San Diego, Arizona, Milwaukee, some of these places, Philadelphia, they can't win 80 games this year. And then what do you have to sell other than seat cushion night or whatever, right? Or social media night, right?
Yeah, so the other element that I want to talk about with the NFL is just kind of what's happening regionally to the NFL. So I'll read you these, and I want to give you your response. So these are the bottom 5 teams in terms of NFL home attendance by capacity to stadium. Okay, not tickets sold.
Can I guess at them or no?
Percentage capacity. The last team, the bottom team, is the San Diego Chargers. The second to last team is the Redskins. Then we go to the Raiders, Browns, and Rams. Okay, so the Rams were 5th worst. So of those teams, the Chargers, Redskins, Raiders, Browns, and Rams, what's one thing from that list that you immediately would look and say, that's one thing that some of those teams have in common?
Well, Washington has a huge stadium, but they also won. Oakland has a crappy stadium, and they won for the first time. The one thing I would say about all of them is none of them ever seem to make the playoffs, right? Or if they do, it's once every 5 years. None of them are any good historically.
Well, 3 of the 5 teams are from California.
Okay,
right?
fair enough.
So what does that tell you about and what's the NFL's issue right now, right? Is you look at those teams, and 3 of those teams have either going through relocation or are intending or likely or want to go through relocation, right? So the NFL has a California problem, right? San Francisco is the other team that's not on there, and they tend to sell their tickets. They've had a new stadium now for a couple of years.
But no one goes. There's a great example.
Right.
You put their games on, it's lonely. Yes.
Even though they announced 100% sold, their capacity at game day was a lot less. Like I said, this was based on tickets sold. And so the NFL is struggling with this California problem, right? There's this idea that we should move teams out there or that we should move teams around out there. But fans are saying something different in California. They're saying, again, not really that interested in your team unless, I guess, you're going to give me consecutive Super Bowl appearances, back-to-back championships, whatever it is. And so I think for 2017 and 2018, one of the interesting business stories for sports will be, how does the NFL address its quote-unquote California problem? What are they going to do about it? Does one team, the Raiders, leave and go to Vegas, and then the other two teams, the Chargers and the Rams, consolidate into Los Angeles? Will that be better than having one team in San Diego, one team in L.A., and one team in Oakland? Hard to say, but I know the NFL has a lot of positive things for business-wise. They're bulletproof and gold-plated when it comes to media. But if you watch these sort of problem areas, these sort of pockets around the country, I think it's an indication of sort of what's going on the business of sports front at the moment.
He is one of our favorite guests, and you always enjoy hearing his thoughts on sports and marketing and business. He is Marty Conway, longtime MLB executive with the Baltimore Orioles as well as the Texas Rangers, now running around down at Georgetown and teaching people like me things about sports. The one thing I would say on the California thing and that we've realized is these building stadiums, this is bad business, right? I mean, if the Raiders could build their own stadium and do it there, they would. No one wants to build stadiums because you can't make money building stadiums, right? I mean, maybe Jerry Jones is an exception, and maybe they'll make money on that L.A. Monolith that they're building out there in Inglewood. But by and large, if I were the guy fronting the bill for the Ravens Stadium over the last 21 years and a handful of Jay-Z and Billy Joel concerts have come through there, it's not a moneymaker, right?
Oh, no, it's not. In fact, I was in Atlanta over the long holiday New Year's weekend, and they're going through. This is the last year of the Georgia Dome, so the Falcons will move, and any of the other activities will move to the new Mercedes-Benz. And I noted when I was walking along the banner that had final year Georgia Dome, and it said 1992, 2016, and I thought to myself, wow, that's the same year that we opened Camden Yards,
right?
And the Georgia Dome is closing because it's no longer useful. Its useful life expired within 25 years. What does that say? It says a couple things. Number one, that the era of new stadium in terms of development is accelerating, right? And that is, if the useful life of a stadium, which used to be 50 or 75 years, is now 25 or 30 years, which is what some of the MCI Center is about to go through this. It's in its 20th, 25th year kind of range right now, and that is that makes it difficult for entities like you're talking about, cities, states, governments, to be able to fund that, because the bond issue needs to run 20 or 25 years in order to pay it off. And if the useful life is such that a stadium is no longer relevant after 25 years, I think that's going to pose some challenges for communities going forward.
Well, look at St. Louis. I mean, they don't have the team, and they're paying for an antiquated building. I mean, that's the greatest example, and that team was fleeced from them. It was stolen from them, really,
So those of us that have been in the sports industry and close to it like yourself, we sort of root for the, we want to see new facilities. We want to see our teams stay where they are. We want stability and all that. But it gives you a sense of how you can look at it from the other side, which is, if you're on the council or you're the mayor or you're the governor and you're presented with these sort of scenarios and you say, this is really difficult to take to the people to say that, well, we're going to use taxpayer-funded sources for these, but at the end of 20 or 25 years, we're either going to have no team left, like in St. Louis, or we're going to be faced with a stadium which we can do, frankly, nothing more. The Georgia Dome will be torn down. There's no other, it will become a parking lot, right? It'll be like the old News American building in Baltimore. You drive by there all the time and you say, wow.
Breaks my heart.
Used to be a media company there, and now it's a parking lot.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I think could occur in many of these places, and that makes it difficult for citizens, for voters, to click yes when the time comes for these kind of referendums.
Well, it certainly feels like the Chargers are gone, right? I mean, at this point, and the Raiders to Vegas is probably just about whether the league will let them do it, right?
Yeah, those are combinations of the league needs to get a certain amount of money from the Raiders if they're going to move. I think there's a higher burden, frankly, of the Raiders moving to Vegas than there is for the Chargers. I think the Chargers was kind of like the M&T Camden Yards deal, where when they approved the Rams going to L.A., there was also a tacit approval of a second team in there. Now, whether it's the Chargers or the Raiders, I do believe it's the Chargers. But I think it's going to be an interesting challenge there because, number one, the Rams themselves haven't done that well in their first year as the first team, and now you're talking about bringing a second team in. It's hard to see how that enhances the corporate marketing efforts and some of the other areas that now you have an oversupply of inventory, which I think initially when a team moves, and I've been involved in helping some of those situations, is you're really trying to capitalize on the newness and the freshness and the lack of inventory that suddenly is now in front of you from a sponsorship perspective. And now if you're saying that, well, the Chargers are going to have to move and they're going to have to find a place to play for 2 or 3 years as well, that puts, 2 teams in the LA Coliseum. I think, again, the NFL has a California problem that they seem to have a hard time solving for. And Stan Kroenke's money is great, but I don't know that it's going to solve all of their problems ultimately on the West Coast.
Yeah, it's not going to put paint on a pig if people don't want to come, for sure. Marty Conway joining us here, our sports professor down at Georgetown and doing all things business. Last thing for you, a little curveball for you. I went to the AFL press conference here a couple weeks ago, and Ted Leones is trying to revive the indoor football thing along with Ron Jaworski up in Philadelphia. He's got Gilbert out in Cleveland. He's got the guy down at Tampa. They're going to field the Baltimore and Washington team. I'm not expecting miracles here in the early going, and I don't know if there's really a market for it, but certainly if anybody's going to do it, and you've seen these Johnny-come-latelys come in and try to drop, and I told the fellas this from Monumental. I'm like, do you know how many press conferences I've been to failed hockey teams, failed indoor lacrosse teams, failed ABL, IBL, ABA, all of these WHL, all of this that's going on in Baltimore. I think they're coming in quietly with this, but the one thing we know is he's got deeper pockets than the rest of these people. He can absorb losing a little money in the beginning, which has always been the biggest issue for these fly-by-night indoor leagues, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm not speaking for Ted in any way, but if I were to project based on what I know and what the strategy is, when he bought into the AFL, there really wasn't any inclination that they were about to lose a bunch of teams, 2, 3, 4 teams, whatever they finally ended up losing. And so buying in, thinking that your league is 8 or 10, and then finding out your league is 4 or 5, even though Dan Gilbert, yes, and Ted and Jaworski, they're well stocked financially in order to be able to handle it. But at the end of the day, a 5-team league, 4-team league, whatever they're going to be, suddenly now it's like, okay, do we need a 6th place? Do we need a team to fill a slot, right? And that is at least for a year. And the way that I understand they're going to run it is all the training will be done at the same place that the Valor will train, the Washington, now named Washington Valor of the league. They'll train there. I think the marketing and sales will also rely upon the Monumental Sports and Entertainment staffs. For that, they may stock somebody local here, do some local marketing as well. So I think it's actually trying to, Ted in this case, own 2 teams, but maybe spend like he has 1.25 teams or 1.5 teams, and to see if they can't build a bridge to a league that can then expand and add back 2 teams or 4 teams coming. But the reality is right now, in sports, in professional sports, the new money, the hot money, is into Major League Soccer. Right now, expansion fees for Major League Soccer are running around $150 million. Don Garber, the commissioner, has said their stated goal is to get to 28, 30, maybe even 32 teams within the next 5 to 6 years. And we don't see that in the Baltimore area. We see it a little bit in Washington because of the DC United franchise. But quite frankly, I think people looking at a return on their investment for the future will look at something like that as opposed to indoor, arena, anything type football. I think the one thing that I've learned over the process of being involved in looking at pro sports and teaching it for a long time is football outside of the NFL, outside of the Big Ten or the SEC, is a huge challenge in this country to sell. And it's great for media, but from an attendance, get up, get in, buy tickets, do that process, football itself it is a challenge. And I think that the indoor version is just another now, there's some ways to make that work. You can economize and do that, and there's another indoor league. So I think they know quite clearly what their challenges are, but I also think they know what their strategy is over the next 1 to 3 years. And if the Baltimore team can be a part of that, great. If they end up getting 3 or 4 other cities that really jump on and want to spend, then maybe this franchise is another one that was here and eventually transitions to someplace else.
He's a lot of fun to follow out on Twitter as well as at LinkedIn, where he blogs, but not frequently enough. He is Marty Conway, our business professor around here, as well as at Georgetown University, and longtime Major League Baseball insider. Marty, Happy New Year to you. I hope we get to a Caps game or a Terps game or a Wizards game. Certainly plenty looking good here over the next 90 days. But even the Wizards have climbed back in this thing. There's some good sports going on, as well as some good local college basketball up here. UMBC's gotten off to a nice start. It's a good time of the year, right? And we have draft and all that, but all is lost for football and baseball around here. It was a real turd for Redskins, Nationals, and Orioles and Ravens this year, wasn't it?
Well, it certainly ended poorly. What started out with high expectations, just about each of those cases that you mentioned, with starting off 3-0, or in the case of making the playoffs or coming down to the finals, or being in a one-game playoff, and then it just kind of ended poorly, ended quickly. But yeah, you got to move on. The next 90 days is always tough around here until opening day hits. You kind of rely upon the Terps and a few other things, but we'll see. Maybe this spring is late winter will be a better one.
I'll come on and complain about spring training when the time comes. Don't you worry, Marty. 6 weeks from now, we'll all get together and talk about Mr. Angelos' franchise, and
we'll wish we could be watching more games on Masson than I'm sure that we'll get. Right?
What was your? You said something earlier in the conversation about revving up for 2.0 and the next year and the sequel. I want to see the sequel to Zach Britton and Buck Showalter this year, right?
Yeah, I think that there you talk about their challenge, and but they'll have to figure it out, or they'll perish one way or the other.
No, they're not going to perish. They have television money. Marty, great having you on, man. Happy New Year.
Okay, thanks a lot.
There he goes. Oh, well, thank you, Marty Conway. You can follow him out on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter at Marty Conway, just the way it sounds. Officiating, teaching, educating, marketing, doing it all out there. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world, as well on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox. That's brought to you by Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com. And last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. Orioles do anything, Ravens do anything, you get it first. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Streaming live on our Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.